"That's the man who hit my mama," the boy whispered in the saloon. The boy's small finger trembled as it pointed through the smoky haze of the saloon. His voice barely carried over the clatter of glasses and rough laughter, but his mother heard every word. "That's him, Mama. That's the man who hit you." Sarah's hand tightened on her son's shoulder. The man at the far table didn't look up from his cards, but his shoulders stiffened. Everyone else kept drinking, kept talking, kept pretending they hadn't heard. "Tommy, we need to go." "But Mama, you said if I ever saw him again." "I said a lot of things." Sarah pulled her shawl tighter around her bruised ribs. "Come on." The boy's feet stayed planted on the sawdust floor. His eyes never left the man's broad back, the way he hunched over his whiskey like he owned the world. "He hurt you real bad. Tommy. I remember the blood on your dress. I remember how you cried when you thought I was sleeping." The saloon seemed to hold its breath. Cards stopped shuffling. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the piano player's fingers hesitated on the keys. The man finally turned around. His face was weathered leather, his eyes cold as winter creek water. He looked at the boy like he was studying a bug he might step on. "You got something to say to me, kid?" Tommy's chin lifted despite his mother's grip tightening on his arm. "You know what you did." "I know a lot of things." The man stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floorboards. "Most of them ain't your business." "It's my business when you make my mama bleed." The words hung in the air like smoke from a discharged gun. Every man in that saloon knew what came next. Some fights started with fists. Others started with a 10-year-old boy's whispered truth that nobody wanted to hear. Sarah pulled her son toward the door, but the damage was done. The accusation had been made. In a place like this, accusations had a way of demanding answers. Sarah's hands shook as she wiped down the bar. The powder on her cheekbone couldn't quite cover the purple shadow underneath. Her long sleeves hid the finger-shaped bruises on her wrists, but nothing could hide the way she flinched when footsteps approached. "Another whiskey." The voice made her stomach clench. She didn't look up, just reached for the bottle with steady hands that betrayed nothing of the storm inside her chest. "You heard what that boy said." "I heard a lot of things tonight." Sarah poured the amber liquid, her eyes fixed on the glass. "Most of them ain't worth repeating. Kids got wild imaginations." "Do they?" The man leaned closer across the bar. Sarah smelled tobacco and sweat and something else that made her skin crawl. "You teaching him to lie about his betters?" "I don't teach my son anything but the truth. Truth's a dangerous thing in a town like this." Sarah finally looked up. Her eyes were steady now, cold as a winter morning. "So is silence. You'd know about that. More than you think." The man's hand covered hers on the bar. His grip was firm enough to bruise, gentle enough to look casual to anyone watching. "Some truths are better left buried. And some graves ain't deep enough." Sarah pulled her hand free and turned away. "Your whiskey's paid for. Drink it or don't." The man stayed at the bar, nursing his glass, watching her move between the tables. Every step she took felt measured, careful, like she was walking on ice that might crack. The other patrons gave her space, reading the tension in her shoulders, the way she held herself like something breakable that refused to break. When she passed his table again, the man spoke without looking up. "That boy of yours needs to learn when to keep his mouth shut." Sarah stopped walking. "Maybe you needed to learn when to keep your hands to yourself." Sheriff Coleman pushed through the saloon doors just as the tension reached its breaking point. His badge caught the lamplight, but the metal looked tarnished, worn thin by too many compromises. "Evening, folks." Heard there was some commotion. Sarah kept her eyes on the bar, wiping the same spot over and over. "Nothing that concerns the law." "Well now, that's for me to decide." Coleman's boots creaked as he walked toward the man's table. "Mr. Hawthorne, you causing trouble again?" "Just enjoying a drink, Sheriff." Like any other paying customer. The name hit Sarah like a slap. Hawthorne. She should have known. The richest rancher in 3 counties, the man who owned half the town and rented the other half. Boy over there seemed to think differently. Coleman nodded toward Tommy, who was still pressed against the wall near the door. Kids say all kinds of things. Hawthorne sipped his whiskey. Most of it is nonsense. That so? Sheriff. Sarah's voice cut through the smoky air. That man put his hands on me. Hurt me bad. My boy was just telling the truth. Coleman turned to look at her, and Sarah saw something die in his eyes. Whatever justice might have lived there was already buried under obligation and fear. Ma'am, that's a serious accusation. It's a serious crime. You got proof of this alleged incident? Sarah gestured to her hidden bruises, her careful movements, the way she held herself like something broken. You need more proof than what you're looking at. I need evidence that'll hold up. In whose court? Coleman's hand rested on his gun belt, but not in a way that suggested he'd use it on Hawthorne. Seems to me we got a case of he said, she said. And which one you planning to believe? The sheriff looked between Sarah and Hawthorne. The rancher smiled into his whiskey glass, already knowing the answer. Mr. Hawthorne's word carries weight in this town. More weight than mine. More weight than most. Sarah led Tommy through their back door into the cold night air. The old stone well stood like a monument to forgotten things, its edges worn smooth by decades of weather and neglect. Mama, why didn't the sheriff believe you? Because some men's words are worth more than others in this world. Sarah knelt beside the well's rim, her hands gripping the cold stones. And some women's pain don't matter at all. Tommy pressed against her side. Tell me what happened. The real story. Sarah stared down into the black water below. Their faces reflected back, but something else seemed to move in the depths. Memories that refused to stay buried. It was 3 months ago. I was closing up the saloon late. And he was there? Mr. Hawthorne was the last customer. Said he had business to discuss. Sarah's voice grew quiet, distant. Said I needed to be friendlier to important men like him. What kind of friendly? The kind that ain't friendship at all. Sarah touched her ribs where they still ached on cold nights. When I told him no, he got angry. Real angry. Tommy's small hand found hers. Did he hurt you bad? Bad enough that I couldn't work for 2 weeks. Bad enough that I still wake up some nights thinking I hear his boots on our porch. The water in the well seemed to ripple without any wind. Sarah had always felt like this old well held secrets, absorbed the pain of everyone who'd ever looked into its depths. Why didn't you tell the sheriff then? Because I knew what would happen. Same thing that happened tonight. Sarah stood, pulling her shawl tighter. Sherman Coleman's been taking Hawthorne's money for years. His loyalty was bought and paid for long before I ever needed it. So what do we do? Sarah looked at her son, saw something hard and determined in his young eyes that reminded her of herself before the world tried to break her spirit. We do what women in this family have always done when men fail us. What's that? We handle it ourselves. 3 soft knocks came at Sarah's kitchen door just after midnight. When she opened it, Martha Wells stood on her porch, the preacher's wife with downcast eyes and careful steps. Heard what happened at the saloon tonight. News travels fast. Faster when it's the truth people been waiting to hear. Martha stepped inside, followed by 2 other figures from the shadows. This is Rebecca, the seamstress. And Jane Collier. Sarah knew Jane. The widow who lived alone on the edge of town, the one people whispered about but never approached. We need to talk. Sarah put the kettle on without asking. Some conversations required ritual, preparation, the comfort of warm cups and steady hands. How long has Hawthorne been hurting women in this town? Years. Jane's voice was rough from disuse. Started with me after my husband died. Figured a widow had no protection, no one to tell. He came to my shop last winter. Rebecca's fingers traced the table's grain, avoiding eye contact. Said I needed to be more accommodating if I wanted to keep my lease. Martha nodded slowly. Pastor's been taking his donations for the new church roof. When I tried to tell him what Hawthorne did to me, he said I must have misunderstood the man's intentions. How many others? More than you'd think. Less than there should be willing to speak up. Sarah poured the tea, her movements deliberate and calm. What changed tonight? Your boy. Jane looked up for the first time. That child stood up in front of everyone and spoke truth. Made the rest of us feel ashamed for our silence. Shame's what they count on. Rebecca's hands clenched into fists. Keep us quiet, keep us afraid, keep us believing it's somehow our fault. Well, I'm tired of being afraid. So are we. Martha reached across the table and touched Sarah's hand. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Sarah looked around the table at these women who'd carried their secrets like stones in their chests for too long. We're going to make sure he can't hurt anyone else. Tommy woke to orange light dancing across his bedroom walls. The smell of smoke drifted through his window, sharp and bitter in the cold night air. Mama! Sarah appeared in his doorway, still dressed, her face illuminated by the distant glow. Go back to sleep, baby. Something's burning. I know. Tommy pressed his face to the window. Flames rose from the direction of Hawthorne's ranch, painting the sky in shades of amber and red. The fire was big, spreading fast across the dry fields. Is it his place? Looks that way. How did it start? Sarah moved to stand beside him at the window. The firelight caught something in her expression that Tommy had never seen before. Not fear. Not sadness. Something else entirely. Sometimes things just catch fire. All by themselves. Sometimes. In the distance, they could hear shouting, the sound of men trying to save what they could. Water buckets and horse hooves and desperate voices calling orders that the wind swallowed. Will he lose everything? Maybe. Sarah's voice was calm, steady. Or maybe just enough to remember what it feels like. To remember what? What it feels like to lose something you can't get back. Tommy watched his mother's face in the firelight. She looked different somehow. Stronger. Like the weight she'd been carrying had lifted just enough for her to stand straight again. Mama, did you? I was here all night with you. We both went to bed early, remember? But. Remember, Tommy. We went to bed early. We didn't see anything. We didn't hear anything until the fire woke us up. The boy nodded slowly. He understood the game now. The way adults protected each other with careful words and selective memory. The other ladies. Were they home tonight too? I imagine they were. Safe in their beds, sleeping sound. The flames reached higher, consuming years of Hawthorne's work in a matter of hours. Tommy had never seen his mother smile like that before. It wasn't happiness exactly. It was justice. The saloon was packed the next evening. Word of the fire had drawn every curious soul in town, and Hawthorne sat at his usual table, his face blackened with soot, his eyes dark with rage. Sarah walked through the front doors like she owned the place. Her back was straight, her chin high, her voice clear as church bells when she spoke. Evening, folks. I got something to say. The room fell silent. Even the piano player stopped mid-song. Some of you heard my boy point at that man last night. Heard him tell the truth about what happened to me. Hawthorne started to rise from his chair. Lady, I think you've said enough. I haven't said nearly enough. Sarah stepped into the center of the room. 3 months ago, this man cornered me after closing. When I wouldn't do what he wanted, he beat me bloody. That's a lie. Is it? Sarah began unbuttoning her sleeves, rolling them up to show the faded bruises that still marked her skin. These marks don't lie. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Women avoided eye contact. Men studied their drinks. Sheriff Coleman stood right here last night and chose to believe his word over mine. But I'm not asking for belief anymore. I'm telling you what happened. You got no proof of anything. I got witnesses. Sarah turned to face the crowd. Martha Wells knows what kind of man you are. So does Rebecca Chin. So does Jane Collier. One by one, the women stood up from their seats scattered throughout the saloon. Silent support in a room full of complicit men. We all know what you did to us. We all stayed quiet because we were afraid. And now we're not afraid anymore. Sarah's voice carried over every corner of the room. Because last night, your precious ranch burned down. And tonight, your reputation's going to burn too. Hawthorne's face turned red with fury. You crazy bitches set that fire. Prove it. The challenge hung in the air like smoke. Sarah stood surrounded by the women who'd finally found their voices, facing down the man who'd silenced them for too long. Sheriff Coleman stepped forward from the back of the crowd, his hand resting on his gun. That's enough talk for one night. No, Sarah said quietly. It's just getting started. 2 weeks after the confrontation, Hawthorne left town with what little he could salvage. Sheriff Coleman turned in his badge the same day. Some said he was ashamed. Others said he was scared. Sarah and Tommy stood behind their house where the old stone well had been. Yesterday, they'd filled it with earth and stones, burying the dark water and all the secrets it held. Why did we cover it up, Mama? Because some things need to stay buried. Sarah knelt in the fresh dirt, her hands steady as she pressed seeds into the soil. And because other things need room to grow. Tommy helped her plant the wildflower seeds they'd bought from Rebecca's shop. The seamstress had smiled when she'd sold them, her face lighter than Sarah had ever seen it. Will they be pretty? Come spring, this whole patch will be covered in color. What kind of flowers? All kinds. Purple lupins and yellow sunflowers and white daisies. Sarah patted down the earth gently. Things that grow back every year, no matter how hard the winter. Tommy sat back on his heels, dirt under his fingernails, hope in his young eyes. Mama, are we going to be okay now? Sarah looked at her son, then at their small house, then at the town beyond, where women walked with their heads held higher than they had in years. Yeah, baby. I think we are. What about the other ladies? They're going to be okay too. We all are. The evening sun slanted across their makeshift garden, warming the earth where new life would soon take root. Sarah had learned something important in the past few weeks. Sometimes justice came through courts and laws. But sometimes it came through fire and truth and women who refused to stay silent. Sometimes it came through planting something beautiful where ugliness used to grow.